Welcome to Elitmind Academy podcast, ElitTalk. ElitTalk is a breakthrough technology, AI and ML, data and cloud-oriented podcast created by top experts in the field of MDW solutions and analytics. Together with our guests, we present the newest updates in leading technology vendors.
Hello and welcome to the new episode of ElitTalk. Today we will be talking about a huge announcement, which is Microsoft Fabric. With me, I have a pleasure to host a very special guest, Paweł Potasiński, Senior Program Manager at Microsoft. Hello, Paweł.
Hello, Andrzej.
So, Paweł, what happened in May?
What happened in May? We had our annual conference, Microsoft Build, and one of the pieces of Build, it was probably the biggest announcement we made since, SQL Server maybe.
Probably,
So Microsoft Fabric is this huge announcement that we made. It's, I would say it's a completely revolutionary product in terms of how we will work with analytics in the nearest future.
So basically a new strategy for the analytics in the Microsoft world.
Well, it's for analytics right now, but you never know, right? It may, because of the nature of this product, it can actually be just the beginning of the new era of products. Right?
The whole platform.
Yeah,
sure. All right. So the magic name, Microsoft Fabric. So can you unpack this term and what is beneath that?
Yes.
Why? Maybe this is the good beginning. Let's start with the reasons why.
Okay, so the reason is, I would say, quite simple. We've been hearing a lot from customers that building solutions for analytics is complex task, or it is complicated because people have to act as CIOs rather than CDOs or data architects. You focus too much on building architecture, infrastructure, and investing your time in integration of different components rather than focusing on bringing value to business users, which is a bad idea, right? Because people from the business side typically want to have quick results, or let's just say start getting results quickly. So simplify was the biggest request we got, and that was the decision behind Fabric. We decided to, let's say, integrate into a single product several products we've been delivering to the market so far. So we have Power BI, Data Factory, and Synapse Analytics. It's not a bundle, so we don't sell three products all together. Rather, we took Power BI and its architecture and we integrated as a completely unified platform, the next generation of Synapse and Data Factory. Not just pipelines, but also pipelines plus data flows generation tool, which is, let's say, the successor of data flows from Power BI. So it's a new platform. It's not like we combine three existing products into one, right?
So from the general perspective, the way, at least as I see it, that is, we are evolving step by step into simplifying things. So historically, we had on-prem when we had the installations, VMs, operating systems, and so on. We evolved into platform as a service type of operations when we...
But even with platform as a service, it's still complex because you have to stitch together several services which have different user experiences, different APIs, often different data formats to store data. And you have to spend a lot of time on integrating those things. So
and networking between puzzles.
So they are sitting right now in a single platform. They are connected all together. They provide single user experience, single central management, pane. So it's actually, I would say that the key word here is unified because it's much like Office. So when business users use, for example, Excel and PowerPoint for different purposes, yet those applications sitting in the Microsoft Office portfolio. They share some common experiences, like you do copy and paste the same way, you format text the same way, etc., etc. So when you learn one product, entering the other one that serves for different purposes is still a matter of smaller learning curve.
Mm-hmm. So basically, we are moving from platform as a service to software as a service.
Yes, very much like in Power BI,
Yes.
because it's when you open Fabric, the UI, you will see that it's very much like Power BI, but you will see additional experiences, additional items that you will be able to create.
Sure. Okay, you said additional experiences, so let's now go a little bit deeper. So what kind of experiences, what kind of services now, if we can go step by step within this portfolio?
So for data integration, we have Data Factory. It's not Azure Data Factory. It's just Data Factory in Fabric.
Mm-hmm.
Again, it is a combination of things that people coming from Azure world know. So pipelines existing in Azure Data Factory and Azure Synapse. Plus data flows generation 2, which is about Power Query experience, but it's the next generation of Power Query, with capabilities of writing data to different destinations like lakehouses in Fabric, for example.
Mm-hmm.
Then there we have 4 experiences built on Microsoft Synapse at that time, not Azure Synapse. Sure. So there is data engineering, data science, data warehouse, and real-time analytics. So data engineering is basically about lakehouses and working with notebooks or preparing Spark jobs, pretty much Spark development, right?
Mm-hmm.
Data science is about again working with notebooks, typically on top of data sitting wherever in the platform, and then preparing ML models and experiments, and of course implementing MLOps, etc.
Mm-hmm.
Plus, if you remember things from Synapse, we provide simple ways to integrate with existing ready-to-use models like cognitive services or LLMs. So Azure OpenAI is easy to integrate as well. Then we have Data Warehouse, which is a different beast from Synapse, from Azure Synapse, because it's a unified SQL experience. So just one SQL runtime instead of 2. No more serverless against dedicated SQL pools, just one SQL engine. You create a warehouse and play with a SQL, right? And there is the fourth Synapse workload or experience called real-time analytics. You have capabilities like integration with streaming data sources like event hubs. And you have artifacts well known from the existing Azure Data Explorer world. So Custo databases, KQL queries, etc. for observation and analytics. So it's actually a combination of real-time and observational analytics. Mm-hmm. The sixth experience is, of course, Power BI, which is the baseline of the architecture, I could say. So it's a leading BI platform for enterprise and self-service business intelligence. And finally, we have Data Activator. I'm not sure if it's still in private preview, but it should be. It's all about going from insights to action. So whenever we see an event that should trigger some action, we can trigger action in external systems or internally within Fabric. So, for example, if you have logistics, analytics for logistics, you may detect some events like change of the status or I don't know, maybe meeting some threshold that should be raised as a kind of event, and then trigger action, for example, by starting some Power Automate task or whatever.
So some kind of if this then that.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's much more sophisticated, and most of all, it works on the high volumes of data.
Mm-hmm. And now this story is quite similar to what we had in Synapse, but there is one, for me at least, a huge difference, which is that every of those services is based on this one like concept.
Yes. So what part of the unification is the unification of storage, because if you look historically, even on existing Azure Synapse offering, the challenge is that there are several runtimes, yet some of them store data in different formats, as often proprietary Microsoft formats, and it's a matter of building some kind of integration between those runtimes to get data from one point to another. So we want to avoid copying data from one point to another in the same architecture. Rather, we want to keep a single copy of data anywhere possible. So OneLake is actually this the storage foundation for the whole Fabric platform. So if you build a lakehouse, a warehouse, custodial database, or whatever stores the data, everything stores the data in this OneLake, in a central data lake behind Fabric. It is created as one logical data lake for a single tenant. So if you create a tenant and start creating artifacts that collects data like lakehouse, it will immediately spin up a single OneLake for a tenant. There will be no two OneLakes, just one OneLake, right?
It's a similar story to OneDrive, right?
Yes, it's this concept. Actually, if you look at how Office works, it stores its documents in OneDrive, so we want data to be stored in OneLake. It's often called OneDrive for data.
Sure. And what maybe must be also said that in order for this OneLake to work the most efficiently, you decided to as for a Delta format as a primary format for storing the data.
Yes. So basically, whatever stores the data in the tabular format, that is for serving purposes. We decided Delta to be this unified standard. By using Delta, you are actually making data available for exchange between different runtimes. So, for example, in a lakehouse, you can create a shortcut to a table existing in the warehouse because both artifacts, lakehouse and warehouse, operate the same data type, the data format, which is Delta. Also, that it doesn't mean that you have to store all the data in Delta format, because in the lakehouse you can store pretty much everything, even the binaries or whatever is needed for your analytics. But if you serve data, if you create tables, those tables behind the scenes use Delta. Delta is also crucial from the point of view of new modes for Power BI, which is called Direct Lake, and it's a kind of getting rid of must of refresh the data whenever you want to have the newest version of data in your data set. So it's actually based on the capability of importing data directly from OneLake from Delta format into Power BI.
So when we had the sign-ups, when we had similarly the portfolio of different services, but requiring to storing data in different proprietary formats or different storages, now the storage became unified.
Yes.
Everything was brought up to the software as a service, let's say, layer in order to simplify the networking, security, and so on between those services to be more transparent and easier. And this introduced also this mimics the whole idea of OneDrive for Office 365. So here we have OneLake for the data.
It has several. I would say it has several advantages. One, first, it's this what we call one copy. So again, when you create something in one, let's say you have different units working on the data in your Fabric environment, and one team creates a lakehouse, the other one creates custodial database. It's fairly easy to combine the data from lakehouse and custodial database, because behind the scenes we use the same OneLake, the same data lake, and the same data format. So they can consume data produced by different teams. That's one. The other one is that OneLake is actually built on the foundation of data lake store. So it uses standard API, so integration with external platforms like Databricks, for example, is fairly easy. And another one is about, when you have a single unified storage foundation, it's fairly easy to manage security centrally. That's another point. So that's why we created this single foundation.
So are there any other changes in comparison to Synapse? Because, Synapse dedicated pool basically are not one-to-one the same thing as
Yes.
Microsoft Fabric data warehouse?
Yes, absolutely. It's not the same. I would say data warehouse in Fabric is a mix of dedicated SQL pools and serverless SQL pools. Yet it has, I would say, it's closer to serverless because you don't spin up any compute power. You don't see any clusters behind the scenes. It just runs on top of your data.
Okay, so I must admit that this one lake concept seems, for me at least, extremely attractive, because these have quite a few positive consequences. So first of all, if we have one layer or one place for the data, we at the same time can separate the data depending on your imagination, let's say. So can you say, for example, about the scenarios when we have the company with different units, how the ownership of the data looks like? Is it possible to distribute this?
So again, that's a good point. I think it's another, let's say, layer of simplification here, because again, if you have one data lake, people do not spin up additional data lakes. So there are no additional places where you manage how you store data, how you organize data in different hierarchies, how you manage security, access, etc. So that's one. Number two, the fact that we have one logical data lake doesn't mean it cannot span across different regions in Microsoft Cloud. So yes, you can have Microsoft Fabric one lake spanning different Azure regions. So it works like that because you can have multiple capacities, which is about providing compute and storage to Fabric. You can place those capacities in different regions, and that's how you create one lake that will be spanned across different regions, and people can store their data in specific locations. So whenever you are regulated or you have to control where your data is stored, you simply create a capacity in specific region that is dedicated to store your data. For example, to be aligned to GDPR or whatever.
Exactly,
right?
Or compliance, some compliance rules.
But still, for governance and administration, you have a single pane of glass because it's a piece of the same one lake for the same Microsoft Fabric tenant.
So we must, let's say, underline this heavily, that logically it's one lake, but physically it can be distributed.
Absolutely.
Depending on your compliance or performance.
Yes, if you look at the hierarchy of how Fabric is organized, we have tenant, which is just like Power BI tenant. So you have Azure Active Directory logins, etc. It's very much aligned to Azure Active Directory and Power BI tenants, right? Then you have capacities. So capacities are pretty much the same as Power BI premium capacities. Basically, Fabric works as well on premium capacities of Power BI. I mean, P1, P2, and etc. It will not work with embedded, or it will not work with premium per user. That's a licensing story, but capacities. So we have tenant, we have capacities, then we have workspaces, which organize the items like data sets, reports, but also lakehouses and warehouses. And you can actually delegate administrative tasks to different levels. So you can delegate some administration to capacity level. You can delegate administration to workspace level, and by that you can actually you can start working in the data mesh operating model.
That's where I'm getting at, because I feel the feeling that we finally have quite possibly the right technology in order to start dealing with the idea of the data mesh quite seriously. Because unified technology and simplified technology, because simplification is quite an important aspect here, enables first of all, distribution of responsibilities between different teams in order to take care of their own data product, as with the definition of data mesh. At the same time, sharing it between each other quite easily because networking and security and everything else is taken care of, and distributed globally. So we truly can start thinking about this kind of scenario that, okay, as in a little bit as in OneDrive, that data are unified in logical way. They are unified, so we don't need to create copies of the data. We decide administratively who see what.
Yes.
But each separate team can handle their own data
Yes, we can distribute ownership. Yes.
Yeah.
There's also one more level of governance. Let's say quantifying the data that sits in Fabric, which is called domain.
Mm-hmm.
So you can put multiple workspaces in a single domain. That's very useful when you deal with, for example, development model based on test, dev, and prod workspaces, or you have multiple business topics handled by a single team or single department. Then you can, for example, create a domain called finance and put all the workspaces that fall into finance responsibility in this domain. It also helps user to locate the data that sits behind specific topic or department, because there is this one hub which can be easily used to find the data based on the domain or assignment to domain, right? So there are four levels finally, right? So we have tenant. Optionally, you have domains because you don't have to create domains. You have fairly simple organization. Then you have workspaces and items, right?
Mm-hmm. You mentioned data governance. With Fabric, it's quite interesting because it was designed with the data governance in mind from the very beginning, right? So what does it mean? I suppose that we can expect straight away some kind of integration with the Purview service.
So I'm not sure how much new is that, because in Power BI we've already introduced some aspects of governance. For example, Microsoft Information Protection sensitivity labels. They were actually put on the every possible level. Lineage was there in Power BI, so now lineage spans across items, not just in Power BI, but also items that exist in Fabric. So you can see which data flow works on top of which lakehouse, for example. So that greatly improves the way you can work with artifacts and find dependencies between those artifacts. There's also a way to certify items that are stored in one lake. So not just data sets, but also you can certify or promote lake houses. Mm-hmm. And also there's a Purview hub. So if you know Microsoft Purview, we try to incorporate some Purview capabilities into Fabric as well, so the users could easily locate the resources and qualify which resources fall into which sensitivity level, etc., right?
And I assume data lineage and all this stuff.
Yes,
will be much easier.
Yes, the security and governance is still a matter of roadmap rather than existing features in Fabric. But yes, keep an eye on that, because that's one of the areas Fabric will be developed dynamically.
Can I assume that basically what the concepts or the way that some parts of data governance or security, as it was implemented for the Power BI, will be trickling down to the Fabric?
Yes, of course, with the assumption that we have to also cover all the backend items like lakehouses and warehouses.
Sure, for sure, yes. Okay, that is quite interesting. You mentioned direct lake between OneLake and Power BI. So this is, I think, one of the crucial features. So let's expand on that. Mm-hmm. Microsoft announced this idea of direct lake. Can you Can you tell a little bit maybe from the perspective of how it was and how it will be thanks to that?
So until Fabric, we've been using two modes of how data sets in Power BI work with data. One was import mode. So whenever I wanted the Power BI report to work as fast as possible, import mode was the best solution because basically it grabs all the data, pulls it into memory, and then organizes the data into a compressed Vertipack data set, right? Sure. So you can play with data. The interaction is immediate, unless you break the model or do something stupid in data modeling or writing your DAX measures. But other than that, it's the fastest way to act with Power BI. The other one is direct query, which is about pulling the most actual data from backend data source like warehouse or lakehouse. So whenever I need my report to show the latest version of data existing in data warehouse, for example, I'm using direct query. So basically data set does not contain data. It only queries the data using SQL, for example, and pulls the data directly from the underlying data source. Now we have a combination. I would call it a combination of those two because Direct Lake is based on the assumption that Power BI or Fabric data set can get the data directly from one lake if the data sits in Delta format. Mm-hmm. So Delta, first of all, Delta is compressed already, so it is great improvement because you can get the compressed data into memory. Then Delta is also columnar format, so it's not anymore like in Power BI import mode where you had to import the whole data set, the whole data sitting behind the data set. Now you can play with columnar format, and the most important part is that it's been done automatically. So if you have a data set in Direct Lake mode, you don't have to refresh anything. It's being done automatically. So you have your data in one lake, and the same data is actually presented to the user in the report with the performance of import mode whenever the data fits the memory behind capacity. So capacity, I'd say capacity level or capacity size will determine how much data you will be able to store in the memory of behind Direct Lake.
I think what is also quite maybe important to mention is that at least in the past we had to connect via networking, via gateways between your data source and Power BI, which was also some kind of choking point potentially in the performance. But right now, since everything sits on the same capacity, this is again simplified. Yes. There is some magic behind the scenes, but from the user perspective, this is just part.
What is also interesting is that Direct Lake works on one lake, but not just on data that you store directly in one lake. If you create a shortcut to external storage, for example, Azure Data Lake Storage or Amazon S3 bucket, you will also be able to connect with Direct Lake mode if only the data is stored in Delta format. So it works on top of those as well.
Yeah, that is...
you don't have to move the data, basically.
Exactly.
Right?
That means that if you already have an existing lake houses or data lakes with the Delta format involved as your current architecture, then you are basically safe. So you don't need to immediately rewrite everything.
Yes.
You have this very important feature of shortcutting, of linking the existing data with the environment of Fabric.
You don't have to get rid of your skills. If you, for example, master Databricks, it's good to go with a combination of one lake, Databricks, and Direct Lake mode in Power BI, and you should be good.
Mm-hmm. And this is again linking to this whole idea of data meshiness in the whole concept, because it simplifies the past with the future and the interconnection between that. Sure, quite quite good, to be honest. You mentioned those capacities, so let's talk about this model because, again, this is quite a different story. So we are typically used to calculate cost via hour of compute for a given cluster or
number of activities for data factory, etc. So
exactly. So here it's simplified once more.
It still contains several factors that impact pricing, but it's much simpler than in a combination of different services, right? So if you remember, let's say you have a combination of Azure Data Factory, Synapse, and Power BI. All those products are licensed in a totally different way. You have to calculate, the activities, the number of integration runtimes, etc. for Data Factory. You have to do calculations for different runtimes in Synapse, and you have Power BI, which can be calculated on per user or per capacity model, or both in many cases. So actually, there are 4 aspects to take into consideration if you think about Fabric licensing. One is the capacity. So this is the most important because that actually determines how much compute power you will get. Capacities are based on something called compute units, but it's fairly corresponding to what we used to have in Power BI Premium. If you consider P1, which had 8 vCores, 4 vCores for front and 4 for backend, or just 8 vCores, right, in total. The corresponding capacity in Fabric is F64, which is 64 compute units. So we have 8-to-1 ratio. 8 compute units means 1 vCore. That's basically it, right? The smallest capacity for Fabric is called F2, and it has only 2 compute units, so not even 1 vCore. But for small organization, like couple of people working on small data sets, that may be good enough. So, and it's much cheaper than P1. So you can actually start playing with the smallest and then just size it up whenever needed. So capacity is one. Then you have to pay for storage. Because if you imagine a situation when you spin up capacity, for example, in Azure, then you pause it, but you store terabytes of data.
Sure.
We don't want, the Fabric to become another, storages for illegal parties. So basically, that's charged pretty much like data lake storage generation to there's like some microcents for gigabytes. That's another aspect to get into account. The third one is if you start working with more complex solution in one lake, like distributed geographically one lake, you will have to pay for egress data movement. So whenever you'll be copying data between one lake regions, or you will be getting data out of one lake, there'll be charging. And the fourth, which also you shouldn't forget, is the Power BI licenses, because whenever you want to produce Power BI dataset report or anything, except the report based on default data sets for Fabric, then you will have to own at least Power BI Pro licenses for creators. But it's only about Power BI items. You're good to go without Power BI Pro license to create a lakehouse or any other backend part of solution. But for the reporting part, there's still Power BI Pro license required, which is consistent with Power BI Premium licensing.
So from my perspective, at least from the storage point of view and from the Power BI point of view, nothing changed, more or less. The only change is from the compute perspective that it is much more simplified in terms of you operate on the capacities and you move up and down depending.
You will have to run some pilots or tests, of course, to make sure that the capacity size you picked for your solution fits your needs, because you will have number of workloads knocking to the same capacity or number of capacities. So that's what needs to be mastered. But we provide tools to track all the activities and how much the capacity is actually impacted by different workloads. So it's fairly easy to control. Also, keep in mind that you have opportunity to buy capacities in two models. One is the model going through M365 subscriptions. The other one is Azure, and in Azure you can pause and resume your capacity. So for development, I would suggest to go and either start trial, which is F64 provided by Microsoft for 60 days for free, or you just spin up a capacity in Azure and then use pause and resume feature to save money.
Sure.
You will pay just for the time you're using your capacity.
Yeah, and I think you mentioned it a little bit, but I want to emphasize this even more. The entry point is much lower. So
Absolutely.
we had the P1, which was around $5,000 per month.
Fabric was not designed to be enterprise only for the biggest customers. We want customers to be able to start from level 0, paying even if you have company that works on a 8-hour shift basis, you will be able to pay for 8 to 10 hours, for example, instead of 24 hours a day. So if we assume that, let's say, $260 is a price for 24/7 per month F2 capacity, you can easily calculate how much this will cost, and it's not the level of P1.
Yes,
for sure.
And also it's a lower level than Synapse.
Yes.
Dedicated pools at least. So we are democratizing the access to the professional data services.
In terms of capacities, I would encourage also to have a look at documentation, because for Power BI we documented behaviors like smoothing, bursting, etc. So how capacities behave under pressure. You should have it mastered whenever you want to run some more sophisticated workloads on Fabric. That's for sure.
So one topic that also comes to my mind, and this happens during the announcements, because a lot of Microsoft builds or majority of Microsoft build was around AI and OpenAI and ChatGPT and all that stuff. And Fabric also is aligned with let's say, with this emerging new concept of doing absolutely everything.
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about what does it mean by being AI powered from the perspective of Fabric?
So, it's actually a continuation of the general strategy of Microsoft for not just Fabric, but every product. If you look at M365 Office, for example, then you will see that we put AI mechanism or assistants like Copilot pretty much everywhere. So you can use or you will be able to use Copilot to assist you with writing Word documents, with creating PowerPoint presentations. The same will apply to Fabric. Right now we have public preview of Copilot for assisting you with DAX code in Power BI, but this will span to different activities, including creation of reports. For data engineers, you will see Copilot being used for example, creation of your code blocks in notebooks. So you will just use prompts, and then you will get code in return, and you will be able to align this code to your needs. Basically, that. I don't think it will end up there. We will do steps forward whenever we will get more advanced in using Copilot. I believe this will go much further, like even for suggesting the components of your solutions, because the number of artifacts, the number of items, number of types of items in Fabric is growing versus Power BI. We have lakehouses, warehouses, Custo databases, etc. So I believe over time you will be. That's my guess. That's my imagination, but I would say even getting into this direction, that AI is able to get your input or prompt and then suggest the building blocks of your solutions in Fabric. That's the direction, right?
Okay, so again, along the line of simplify and make it accessible to as many people as possible. All right, it sounds great. So with the Fabric, where we are right now in terms of public versus private preview, and how can someone start playing around right now?
So starting Fabric is fairly simple. The only thing you need is actually a Power BI tenant. And then you can start free trial for 60 days. Microsoft provides you with a free to use capacity F64 actually. So pretty big. It's 60 day. It does not require to provide any credit card or pay any money, and you should be good to go. So that's one. It's if you go to aka.ms/fabric aka.ms/try-fabric, then you will be good to go, right? Other than that, I would say that you should watch the recording of build sessions. We have it actually gathered all together. If you go back to Power BI blog, there's a single blog post on that. And you have some nice tutorials in the documentation where you can start playing with different scenarios like lakehouse, warehouse, real-time analytics, or data science, and that's the place I would start with.
Okay, and I assume that if with Fabric the story will repeat itself as it was with Power BI, that we can expect quite a rapid number of updates, changes, and so on. So what is your recommended path to keep up to date with?
So soon we should have, first of all, the roadmap. In the documentation. This is going to be just like for Power BI, which has its waves, release waves. So we will have roadmap for Fabric as well. We will have release notes in the documentation as well, and there will be monthly updates, announcements coming on the Fabric blog, and in release notes as well. So you should have multiple places to find the latest updates.
So subscribe to Fabric blog because the blog post will arrive.
And keep an eye on the documentation because that's where we will be keeping the recent updates and coming features as well.
Can we count on your updates from the LinkedIn? Your updates for what happened, what changed?
Yes, I do plan to update on that. Not just on that, but also Power BI is still alive. Well, Synapse is maybe not that active in terms of the updates, but I think all the platforms will benefit from what is being developed for Fabric as well. So, yeah.
So on this high note, Paweł, thank you very much for this discussion. I am still waiting for your posts on LinkedIn. This is a great source of information for me of what's new. And thanks for everything that you do for the community.
Thank you very much, and everyone who listens to our podcast, make sure you join the Fabric community. We created lots of resources, but one of the major resources is the forum that sits on basically just next to the Power BI forum. Make sure you jump into this and ask your question or answer questions from other users, and maybe you will become a community hero. Thanks.
Of course, exciting times ahead. Thank you. Bye.
Bye.